Hey everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, I'll be showing you how to install a brand new motor in your RC car. This video will apply to pretty much every RC car ever made, but in this video, I'll be specifically explaining how to install it in a traxxas RC car. The thing to know is if your motor is actually bad. And a good way to know if your motor is bad is if it has a funky or interesting smell coming out of it while driving, or smoke coming out. For a brand new motor or a brand new RC car, it should do that for the first or second run. But if it just started doing that, then you need to replace your motor. And if it's really slow, if it's all of a sudden just slow, then the motor's probably bad. In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to replace the motor on this traxxas Slash, and this traxxas Slash will also be a demonstration for all the models on the screen. And this traxxas Rally will be another model that I'm going to show demonstrating replacing the motor, and this model will apply for all these models on the screen. First model we're going to show demonstrating the motor replacement will be this traxxas Slash. The first step is obviously take off the body. And you technically don't need to do that, but it's way easier if you do. And now what we have to do is take off this right rear tire. This RC car is very dirty, and I'll make a video on this specific one right here. And I have to leave it dirty for that video, but don't mind that. We're replacing the motor. The next step is this gear cover. If you can see, there's a screw right there and a screw right there. There are two screws, and those screws are a 2mm hex. Just a little side note thing, this car was used, so that's what the video will be about. And it looks like the previous owner broke a gear cover, and they used electrical tape to fix it. The next step is removing the actual motor. So with these two screws right here, they're a 2mm, or some cars have a Phillips head. And these are like a big flat kind of screw, but it's still a 2mm. If you notice this top one, it's actually covered by the spur gear here, and you don't really need to remove the spur gear, because if you just unscrew it while pulling the motor, the screw doesn't pull out, it just stays, but the motor goes backwards. If that makes sense. If you're confused by the screw thing, is this screw's being covered, so you unscrew it. But if you unscrew it, it's obviously going to hit the spur gear. That's when you pull back on the motor. So when the threads go out, the screw doesn't pull out, the motor pulls out. See that? Now the motor's out. Now you're at this stage where the motor is sitting outside of the vehicle. What you want to do is take these two bullet connectors off, and you hold it, half of your finger is on the silicone area, and half of it is on the wire. If you pull just on the wire, then sometimes the wire can come out, and you pull just on this cover, just the cover can come out. But just don't overthink it, just unplug it. Sometimes they are hard. See that? Because this car is pretty old, probably the original motor. But yeah, just like that, and now let's get the pinion gear off. Getting the pinion gear off the motor is pretty simple, it's just one grub screw. And you can try to remember how the pinion's set on the motor. Sometimes you can get like a 1.5mm hex driver and like, oh, it's 2, so it's like 3mm away. But don't really overthink it. Once it's in the car, you can line it up and make it perfect. So what we're going to need is a 1.5mm hex driver. Some cars use a 1.3, but that's not really as common. And a traxxas car is going to be a 1.5. And I'm not going to use the new motor because this car I'm getting it ready for another video, so I have to keep the original motor. But I'll take it off. So just like that, and okay, about one turn to take it out. You don't have to take it all the way out. And then it'll just slip off like that in this pinion gear. And then you could transfer it over to the other motor by getting the motor and then putting it on roughly where it was before. It doesn't have to be perfect at all. Just kind of like tighten it until it stops. Like that. Not really that tight. And then when we put it back in the car, we can kind of dial it in. Getting ready to put this motor back in the vehicle. What we're going to do is, this screw is still in there because it's being covered by this spur gear. And I like to move the motor wires just out of the way in front of the camber link because they can't get in the way, the ESC motor wires. And what you want to do is position the motor a certain way, because if you look, these motor wires are on at a right angle. So if you mount it like this, then they have to go up at a stupid angle. Make sure it is correct. And it's also, this one's going to be facing towards the front of the vehicle. If it's backwards, obviously that sucks. You can see there's 3 holes on the motor. That one is threaded, this one's threaded, this one's not threaded. So put the thread one up against that screw. You'll know when you find it. I put the screwdriver in and just kind of search. And oh, that's not the thread. You kind of have to like search for it. See that? Now it's stuck in there. So I know now that it's in the thread. It's in the motor. You can tighten it down, not all the way. And the bottom is actually a slot. Underneath there is a slot. And that's how you actually set the gear mesh. I'll show you how to set the gear mesh. But you don't want the pinion gear and spur gear to be too close together or too loose. So I'll show you how to set the gear mesh. So the way I set my gear mesh is by eye and by feel. But if you can just not get it, this is a trick. This is some receipt paper. Some thin receipt paper. And you can see the motor can move out of the way. Well, kind of. So usually it moves more. I think my motor screws are too tight. But it'll move away from the spur gear. So then you can see that. Now it moves more. So you'll move away from the spur gear. And you can put the receipt paper between the 2 gears. And then you push it up against, not force it, just push it up against. Hold it against it, and then you tighten the 2 motor screws with a little bit more pressure than any other screw. Because if this motor moves, you're going to ship a spur gear. So you want to make sure these are tight. But don't strip the motor. And now what you're going to do is roll this paper out. So it should be like a crinkle. And just a little tiny bit of play. That's actually perfect. Receipt paper is perfect. Some people use regular printer paper, but that's too thick. The way I do it by sight and feel is not really that hard. Just try to get it a little tiny bit looser than like crushed together. But you don't want to click, click, click. I usually have the teeth. I don't want them all the way in or like barely touching. I usually have them halfway or a little bit more than halfway. I think that's about the perfect gear mesh. So you'll know if it's good, and that's about perfect. And now we're gonna get this gear cover back on. We're gonna put this gear cover back on. Flat side goes down. It's pretty obvious what way it goes, really. Okay. Really gotta put the screws in. So there are 2 sizes of screws that hold it. There's a shorter one and a longer one. The shorter one goes in the bottom. And some cars, like a Rustler or something, has Phillips screws. But a Slash specifically has 2mm hex screws. So yeah, the Short screw goes on the bottom, long screw on top. And this one, it was kind of misaligned because of that whole electrical tape breaking thing. But the gear cover isn't that important of a piece of the car. It's just a cover. Now the gear cover's on. And don't forget to plug in your motor wires. Motor installation is done on this traxxas Slash. Now time to put the wheel back on. Now we're going to move on to the 4-wheel drive model. This is a traxxas Slash Rally, and the body's already off. And to replace the motor, it's right there. And the first thing we have to do is take this cover off. And all it is to take the cover off is this one screw right there. As you can see, I took this cover off, just one screw. And when it's on there, you want to pull towards the motor to like crack it loose, I guess. So I think it's the easiest way to get it off. And once that's off, now you have access to the motor plate. And right here is a M3 screw, and it's a machine head or a cap screw. So you want to use a 2.5 millimeter hex driver. And I prefer to use a ball end because when the hex driver is here, it's not at a perfect angle because of the receiver box and stuff. So I'm going to use a ball end to get that out. As you can see, I flipped the car around so you have a better angle. And after you get this motor out, what we want to do is pull it back out here, this direction, and then straight up, like that. And now we take this wire clamp off, and that's a 2 millimeter hex driver. Now that the wire clamp is off, we can obviously get to the wires, and we're going to unplug them the same as the other vehicle. These ones are pretty tight too. Oh, see that? How that slipped? This thing slipped. That's why you gotta hold it kind of special, but don't really overthink how to hold it. Okay. Now the motor's out, we gotta take this motor plate off. These are two 2 millimeter screws. They're flat heads. We're gonna take these out. They're actually pretty short because they just go in the motor. So that's one out. And then get the other one out. Okay, like that. Now the motor is off that motor plate. And now time to get this pinion gear off. Now getting this pinion gear off is the same as the other vehicle. And just to note, this pinion gear is a 48 pitch. That Slash before is also a 48 pitch. That works with the receipt paper trick. But another car, let's say like a Rustler 4x4, that has 32 pitch, which is bigger, coarser teeth. So the gear would be bigger for the same amount of teeth. And that you use regular printer paper to do the gear mesh. Putting this motor plate on, it's not really that hard. See, this motor, as you look, these wires come out straight. And here's a brand new motor I have. See, they come out at a right angle. It's almost like if you have a bunch of traxxas motors, half of them are soldered like this, half of them are soldered like this. So if you're shopping for a brand new one inside of a hobby shop, you want to look for one that has the same as yours. Because if you have a right angle in a 4-wheel drive, it's kind of difficult. But in a 2-wheel drive, a right angle is great. Or the other way around, a 4-wheel drive is great with the straight, but a 2-wheel drive sucks with a straight. Because it has to make that turn. That's why the right angle is so good. You want to make sure these motors are however you want them. If you want the ugly side up, you can have that. But I want the cool, cleaner way up. And look at this plate. The slot is facing up. So in the car, if you want this side up, that's what goes up. So this hole is going to go there. And they're going to put these two screws in. Now these two screws are the same length. They're a 3x8 millimeter flathead screw. And that's pretty short. Usually they're 10 millimeters. But if it's too long, it can actually contact internal parts of the motor and mess stuff up. So you want to use the stock length screw for these. And you want to tighten it when it hits about like half a turn after it makes contact with the plate. We're back at the car. I have the motor on this. And if you have the pinion gear, you can have it sliding so it's loose. And then you put the pinion gear or the motor in the right spot. And then you can figure out where you want it and then tighten it down. So how this car works to set the gear mesh is there's a pin right here. And then it rides on that pin. So it's like a pivot point. So it pivots on that pin. And the slot locks it down. Or where that machine screw was. So you make sure it's on that pivot. That corner. Just like that. And the motor goes next to it. And now I'll set the gear mesh for this. It's actually pretty much the same as the other car. Except that instead of pushing the motor straight, it's at like an angle, kind of turning. But it's pretty much the same. It's maybe a little harder to put the paper in. So here's the same paper from before. So if I pull the motor back like that, I'll put the paper in between the motor and the spur gear like that. Whoops. Okay. And you're not going to force the gears together, just so they touch. And that machine screw from before, we're going to screw this in. And I'm going to use a ball end again because of the receiver box. So you screw this in. And you want to make sure that the paper doesn't rip when you take it out. That means it's too tight. So we're going to screw it in, not all the way, so it can still kind of move. So you push it in, touch, and then I'm putting the screw down. So really, it stopped, and then like an extra, that's how you know it's tight. And you can roll the car to get it out. You want to feel the gear mesh. And for 48 pitch, a receipt paper is perfect. And yes, this gear mesh is perfect. So now, we gotta put this wire clamp back on and route these motor wires. Alright, this motor clamp is on and the wires are nicely tucked. Now time to get this gear cover back on. And it's that little tiny screw from before. It's only one screw. And what you want to do is kind of slide it into the motor side first. Kind of behind the blue plate. And this is pretty difficult because you have to get it kind of perfect in there. And it does have some flex factor to it. It's not going to fit perfectly. When you screw it down, it kind of like settles. Now this gear cover is on, and you want to make sure the car isn't very hard to push, and if it's like super hard and easy all of a sudden, then your spur gear might be ovaled, or your gear mesh is set wrong. But this car seems dialed and great. So now this car has a fresh installed motor. Thank you everybody for watching me install this motor and that motor. And remember, I'll see you guys next time on Sunshine RCs.